Hi everyone, my name's Phoebe, and today I'm gonna walk you through our knitwear feature. So we're really excited about this feature. It's gonna get you more visual knitting than ever before. It's gonna look so much more realistic. It's gonna be really great. So let's dive on in and learn all on how we can edit the knitting, create the knitting, and all of that. So let's have some fun while we learn. All right, knitwear. Are we ready? So, I don't know if you all know, but we've added this knitwear feature to CLO that's really, really cool. Let's first start by showing you all of the stitches we have as presets and how you can use them and do all of that. So here we have kind of a little bit of a layout, and what we're going to do is we're going to add stitches to each one. So the first one here is our garter. So I'm going to select my fabric here, as you see. And if I go to my property editor, I can then go to type right down here below. And I'm going to select knitwear, right? The knitwear is really, really important. So I'm going to select knitwear. You'll see that garter is the first option here. And what I'm going to do is zoom in. And here is my garter stitch. Nice, right? So I have some options once I have my garter stitch, and I can edit it around. But let's just first see all of the stitches. So this is my garter. Next, we have stockinette. So again, I'm going to go to type, knitwear, and then under stitching, I'm going to switch to stockinette. Nice. Next, we have reverse stockinette. Again, select fabric, knitwear under type, and then stitching, reverse stockinette. So it's this simple to switch around to different stitches and everything. It's all within the stitch. It's this drop down, and then you can switch between these different stitch presets that we have for you. Right now, you're only able to use these presets. We are working on getting you more and also seeing how we can make it so that you can even create your own presets and all of that. It is all in the work, so don't you worry. Okay, so now I have all these stitches here. What I'm going to do is simulate. Now, here's something you should know. When you simulate, right, so I'm going to simulate. Not much is going to really change. That's because the fabric property is still the same. All that's being changed right now is the visual. So I can select all of these here, and I can change it to a knit property, right? So I can change it to cut and sew rib here, and then simulate, and then it will start to change. But changing to this visual will not actually change the fabric's properties. It's all visual. So what do I mean by that, you might ask? Well, great question. Let's look at the garter and stockinette side by side. Right now, these two, both of these fabrics, are using this new visual technique, which actually changes your mesh. Let's just change garter back to fabric mat. And again, I can simulate. It's going to stay exactly the same. The visual that's being changed is the mesh itself. So if I actually, let me turn off simulation. If I go here and I show mesh, you see already that this mesh is very different, right? From this. You can't even really see this mesh. That's because this mesh is completely shaped in a different way than what our normal meshes are. It's actually 3D and dimensional and really tight and all of that. So the mesh is actually completely shaped differently here. That's why if you change the fabric properties, that will then change the draping. But the visual aspect of this is changing quite a bit. Not the physical. Just know this, FYI. Now, I know what some of you might ask. You might ask, okay, but like then if I select my patterns, does me changing out the particle distance change it like it did in the old way? Because when you would select this, if I then selected this and changed my particle distance and hit simulate, like it would change. Does it do the same thing? Yeah. This will still change, right? Because this is not the knit. But it will not actually, the particle distance for this stuff will not actually change that much because it's already a completely different mesh and it's already a smaller particle distance and all of that. That's why it's so important if you are going to do a lot of editing quickly to hide the show knitwear option. So you want to actually hide the knitwear. So once you do that, then all your mesh will go back to that flat mesh. Once you hit show knitwear, it will then go back to the 3-dimensional mesh that's actually really, really hard to see because it's so tiny and everything. That is just some background in mesh. When we get to the garment, we'll look at it even more. But here now I have all my stitches all laid out and everything. What can I do with these? Well, you can do quite a bit. First off, so happy you asked. Thank you. So what can you do with these stitches? Well, you can do a lot. There's all of these options down below after you go to stitching. There's gauge, ply amount, yarn thickness, generating seams, and then seam length, seam curvature for the generating seams. The ply normal map, ply colors, and then also you could add in a texture if you wanted, and you could add in like an overall color. You can adjust your roughness, all of that. So quite a bit to adjust even in our first round for the knitwear. Let's talk about what each section means, right? So gauge. For any one of you who's not like a knitter or like, I don't know, who doesn't own a knitting machine or like doesn't like knit at home by hand, whatever. The gauge is more like stitches per inch, meaning it's really important for machines and all of that. A lot of the time you don't really do a lot with gauge when you're doing like hand knitting, like you do know, right? Like, because you have to know the needle and like how many stitches do make up your inch. But there are like set gauges on knitting machines. And I know most of you already know this and you're like, yeah, Phoebe, we know. You don't need to teach me about knitting, but let me just teach you about CLO. So we have this gauge option. The lower your gauge, the less stitches you'll have per inch, making it so like you could create really open knits, kind of like this. Right? Now, let's go to the stock. If you have a higher gauge, that means you have a lot more stitches per inch, which means you're going to create really, really tight stitches, especially if you have a thicker yarn. So this gauge has a lot to do with yarn thickness too. So if you want to like make it really nice and match it up well, always make sure if you're going to change your gauge to also change your yarn thickness. So the higher I go up with this gauge, right, the lower I should go down with my yarn thickness. So I can go down to like 0.75 and that will make it look nice. I could go down to 0.5 too. That will make it look really nice and all of that. And I can keep hiring this up and all of that. And I could then do 0.25, right? The same can be said when I want to go big with this garter stitch here. So if I want to go like really low in my gauge, I could also go really high with my thickness. So I could say 2, right? That's like a nice thickness. I could go up even higher, say like 4. And then I've got like this really chunky knit almost. We could do with like blankets or like pillows. I don't know, like the fun chunky knitting that you sometimes do. So you can really play around with the yarn thickness and the gauge, but play around with them together because when you pair them together, then you're going to get better results. and everything. But also you've seen like sometimes it's really fun, and we can do this with the reverse stockinetting here. Like it's also nice when you do a really low gauge and you can sometimes just like see through it and everything, or if you like want more like open, kind of like almost a lace-ish look, like a very open kind of knit look that you might go for. So it's really nice, the gauge and seam length. Now, underneath gauge, we have this thing called ply amount. Ply amount. Now, okay, again, I know a lot of you already know this. You're like, Femi, I don't need a lesson in knitting. But some of you might. Okay, so let's just do it real quick. Ply amount. Ply amount is kind of like, think of ends, the amount of ends you have in one yarn. So as we all know, or some of us know, or now all of us will know, most yarns have like multiple yarns within it because you're twisting it, because that makes the yarn even stronger. So what we're saying here is how many plies are in that yarn. So most yarns have at least 2. The really, really chunky yarns might not, or if you're like knitting from roving, then yeah, you just have 1 ply. But, and that's like a whole nother thing. But for ply amounts, we now have 1 all the way to 6. I'm gonna say 4 right now because that's a little bit more standard. But the ply amounts mean how many times it's gonna be wrapped around. If I zoom in really tight here, you can kind of start to see like these grays that like are twisting around that are really nice. So that's like how many plies. If I change this out a bit to 1, you see like there's less of that versus the 4 when there's more, and all of that. So what do you pair the ply amount with? Well, what's really nice is you can actually pair this with your colors, which is really cool. So let's say for seed, actually I only have like 1. And then I change my color to, I don't know, let's say this. Then it's going to be completely uniformed, all 1 color, easy. Right? Because that's just my 1 ply. Now let's go to moss. Moss, let's say there's 3. Right? I'm also going to lower my gauge a bit. There. Let's say there's 3. Now what I can do is go to my colors. So now I have more of like a multiple colored, all these different colored plies and everything that like more kind of, this is giving me a Halloween vibe. I don't know why, but it is. We could also do like, let's say 4 and you want more, start with 3. Let's go to rib 1 by 1. And let's say we have the 4. You could also do something that has like more subtle, right? So you could apply and then apply. Right, a little bit more subtle changes. Or you can even go back here and go back to this one. Or this one, right? And then this gives like nice depth and range, but not too different. So there's a lot of ways in which you can play around with this ply to make it kind of look like how you want. What's also really nice is, we can go to the rib 2 by 2, is you can do all of these changes. So I can say like I want a tighter gauge, 0.75, 4 here. So let's go to blue. So I have all of this here now. And what I can also do is I can go and play around with my roughness. So I can adjust this a bit, and this will also adjust with the light. So if I want it, I can turn this off. So if I want this to be a little bit rougher, less reflection coming in, I can adjust that. I can also create more reflection intensity or lower that, right? And I can play around with my roughness to see like how shiny I want it, right? Like this is very shiny because the roughness is low. Or I can increase it to make it a little bit matter and like rougher, which is also really nice. You also have the option of here with this rib 4x4 is you can also just do 1 color completely over. So if you didn't want to go through like, oh, like let me do plies, you can just have one like, and then that also can give you a nice like effect. Another thing you can do though is you could bring in a texture if you wanted to. So here I can open up and so you can also add in like textures, and then it can also be seen in your print, in your like knit, which is also really cool. So like you can start to add like, if you wanted kind of like a knitted print, you could do that too. And you can also see how then that's like part of the knit as well, which is really, really nice. So those are some like textural and like image and color and sizing and yarn and all of that kind of changes. We also have this option for generating seams. So I left this one for last because this one's a little bit hard to wrap your head around. So you can have this on or off. Off, it like cuts all the edges clean as if you're doing a cut and sew. So that's really nice because if you're doing like a cut and sew, then yeah, you should have the edges clean off, and then you can just like sew it together, and the hem should be like behind and inside the garment. However, if you're doing something more of like a fully fashioned, then maybe you want to check generate seams right here on. And that will then extend these out and allow you to play around like that. So if I rotate here to the side, you can see this a little bit better. So right now I have generate seams on. I have a pretty high curvature and a low seam length. What happens is if I lower this curvature, then that means like this curve goes straighter. It's easier to just show you. So I'm going to lower this, and you see how now the curve starts to get straighter and straighter? Less curved back. See? I can also then lengthen these, right? So that it goes longer. But the big change is always the curvature. So the lower the curvature goes, like the more it's going to go out. But also then that makes it so that the length could get higher because the curvature is going out more. If you lower down the length back to like 0 though, it won't matter what your curvature is because you don't have any length in your seam. So if you go all the way down with your curvature, it goes really far out like this. So this is like, if you really don't want any curve or anything, that's a 0 one, and that's very extreme. But then you can have your line length really, really low if you wanted. If you were like, oh, let's just do one. This shouldn't really have any, right? So if it shouldn't have any curve, then there you go. But most of the time, I think you would want to have a lot of a curve because most of the time it's getting tucked in or it's getting curved behind. So for this one, let's just go through with everything that we've learned, right? So with these two, let's go through everything that we've learned. So here, like a... For this one, one final thing, so you've probably all been noticing that there's this like ply normal map. Just so you all see what it looks like basically a ball of yarn. This is how it's getting that like wrapping around look almost to it. It's not adding any dimension. No dimension is being added because the mesh is now 3-dimensional. Yeah. And there you have it. A bunch of knit options that are all really, really cool and that you can play around with. So let's quickly jump actually to a garment and play around with it. So, okay, so here I've got a project file and I've got this cute little shirt here. And what I'm going to do is add in some of these stitches that we have just gone over. So now I have a garment that uses all of these different types of knits applied really quickly and easily because you can, of course, save these. And also if you're playing around with the different types. So here, if I went back to silk, satin, and then I went back to knit, it would save that stuff out, which is all really, really nice. And I can also show you a little bit again. If I go to the mesh, you'll start to see a little bit better on her just what I'm talking about. So you can kind of see how this mesh is in the shape of a knit. So it's very, very different from these meshes, right? Because this mesh is in the shape of a knit. So that's why it's a very, very different, which is why it's really, really important to hide knitwear if you're trying to work really fast or if you're trying to do a lot of colorways. It's just going to make your life so much easier than if you have show knitwear on the whole time and then you're trying to edit. So like, please remember to use the hide show knitwear when you're about to edit things or adjust things or anything like that. So here are some great render examples of using the Knitwear tool. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed everything and that you're excited to start knitting. If you have any questions, use the comment section below. If you want to learn more, check out our YouTube channel. There's so many great videos to learn from and so many things to learn about within our CLO software and CLO set, all in our YouTube channel. And thanks so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed.